then we can say what about those people. If somebody says Ruby and somebody says cool, what would you think about somebody using the word Ruby? Probably older, okay, or desperately, you know, out of fashion, perhaps. And cool is still fine, I suppose. Do you still use the word cool? Okay, fine. So the word rat, for instance, was like 90s or something. I suppose you can tell, you know, something about, you know, the age, the age that person belongs to. Also, if you have something like you ain't seen nothing yet versus you haven't seen nothing yet versus you have not seen anything yet. Like all those expressions, what can you tell about them? What are they suggesting to you? Remember that by suggesting, I'm saying, what do they make you understand? Which is the thing we're talking about. What do you understand, you know, do they mean the same? Yeah, they mean the same at a referential level. They are expressing the same kind of reality. Once again, at a referential level, they mean the same, because we're talking about meaning as reference. However, I was telling you that there are also other ways of understanding things that go beyond the referential level. So if somebody uses those expressions, what are you understanding about that person? What can you say? There is a very, you know, useful thing, you know, we like to say about people, you know, oh, that is, when somebody says something that you think, oh, he looks like he's not well, or she's not well educated, or I wouldn't use those terms, you know, in front of the president of the university, or I wouldn't talk to my grandmother that way. I would talk to my friends that way. You're talking about the style, okay? The style the person uses, correctness, incorrectness, or pretty much formality or informality. That's information that also language can convey. And there is, besides that, there is another way of understanding that is related to, and this is also in Finnegan's book, it is related to the distinction between connotation and denotation. So pretty much connotation and denotation, when you think hard about it, is very, very similar, virtually the same thing as the difference between reference and sense. The denotation can be considered to be the objective way in which you are representing something. Okay? Whereas the connotation is what is implied, what is suggested by the use. So, you know, the famous philosopher Bertrand Russell once was asked on a radio interview, what's the difference between denotation and connotation? And he said, well, the difference between denotation and connotation is this. And he said, I am firm, you are obstinate, and he's a pig-headed fool. So connotation depends on how you want to portray a supposedly shared core meaning. Okay? So when you're talking about the core meaning, most likely the best way to represent a core meaning is assuming the reference of the term. So what kind of objective reality you are describing by the languages. So if you say firm, obstinate, pig-headed, they are pretty much, you know, the same thing, and the difference is how do you suggest how do you portray it? Is it a positive quality or is it a negative quality? If it's a positive quality, we are firm here. If it's not that positive, you're obstinate. If it's really bad, then you're pig-headed. And the same can go for the other one. I'm a perfectionist, you're anal, and he's a control freak. Pretty much you're talking about the same kind of attitude towards, you know, being neat, being clean, being organized, but one is positive and the last one is particularly negative. Nobody wants to be called a control freak, but everybody wants to be a perfectionist. Okay? I even, you know, dislike that word perfectionist. Sometimes it's a little overwhelming. So, let's go to the semantics in language. We're going to talk about today mostly about lexical semantics, and that's what I want to focus the lecture today. And of course, we're going to talk about how words, how those tiny elements, you know, that convey meaning, okay, that you mix together to make sentences and text, how they are organized, and how we can trace relationships relations between them, between the elements. Because our knowledge of the lexicon is a fancy word we linguists use for a dictionary. Like a dictionary in your head, that's the idea of a lexicon. So how is it organized? I'm going to talk about it in a minute. But also in your book, you're going to find about sentence meaning, the grammatical semantics. So to illustrate that, we can see the difference, because I won't talk about it, I'm just going to give you an idea of what it is about, is what's the difference between tragically, Peter died, and Peter died tragically. If everybody here speaks English, I hope so, this distinction should be pretty clear. Otherwise, I don't know English and I just made a huge mistake. Please, suggestions? What's the difference? Please?
The first one, Peter died, and it's tragic. But the second one, he died in a tragic fashion.
Absolutely. Well put. So the first one, look at the position of the adverb, tragically, has scope, that's a technical term, has scope over the expression Peter died. So the fact that Peter died is what we are calling tragic. Whereas Peter died tragically only has a scope over died. So we're saying that the way in which he died was tragic. And that's a meaning difference, of course, it is one. But we can create that difference by the position of a word in a sentence. And there are plenty of other ways in which we can talk about grammatical meaning. For instance, the meaning of a suffix, the meaning of a pronoun. It's way more complex because it's more abstract. Whereas words tend to have nouns, verbs, adjectives. They tend to have a more concrete meaning. So, for lexical semantics then, we're going to talk about how we have things organized in the lexicon. So we're going to do a very quick experiment so you can see how things might be organized, okay? So I'm going to say a word and then you have to tell me something that comes immediately to your mind. So a very simple experiment. If I say boy, you say dog. If I say cat, you say dog. If I say finger, you say hand. If I say hot, you say cold. Why don't you say sexy? Is it possible to say hot, sexy? Are those related? Yeah, of course. They are related, but as you can see, let's assume, let's see if I can do a little drawing here. Let's assume that you can have a word here, okay? And this is the word hot. And let's talk about the neighborhood of the word hot. So, if this is the neighborhood, what do you think is going to be inside of that neighborhood? Dog? Hot dog? Excellent, it works. What is going to be inside of the neighborhood of that word, of that concept? We're talking about concepts here. Very important thing. Things in your head, concepts. What do you think is going to be more likely to be in the same neighborhood? What other word? Cold, tepid, warm, heat. Words that are related to what field? Temperature. Excellent. Excellent. So we're going to have here, I was going to write on the wrong screen. You're going to have temperature here, and you're going to have cold, and then you're going to have warm, etc., etc., etc. And then temperature might be, linked to what? As a big field, if you talk about temperature, weather, excellent. Weather, and then you're going to keep multiplying the connections. So the idea is that your knowledge of words is a massively intricate network of concepts. But they are not, tied in a very, willy-nilly way. They have to be tied with certain structure. Some words are very similar to each other. Warm is kind of similar to hot. Okay? What's more than hot? Hotter. Good call. Now you're using grammatical semantics now. You're using a suffix. Okay? Is there a word, that you could say, a word, only a word, one token that you could use for something that is more than hot? feverish, ardent, I don't know, smoldering.
Boiling.
Hmm?
Boiling.
Wow, I didn't know that one. But there is something there. Well, so the idea is that words have relationship among them. Go here. Then they seem to be organized accordingly in terms of similarity, inclusiveness, opposition like hot and cold, complementariness, I suppose, like boy and girl, and etc. That we're going to see right now. It is important to have this in mind because this kind of knowledge allow us to actually make sense of what we're talking about. And then we are, in some sense, ready to follow up the flow of information. When we're talking about boys and we're talking about, it's very likely that they are going to also talk about girls. If we're talking about marriage, it's very likely that somebody's going to talk about a wife, and somebody's going to talk about a husband. So we get, it's like getting your, how do you say that? It's like getting your file ready. It's like getting all the information ready, just being, so that we are more efficient when we produce and when we understand language. So you can see a semantic field here. This is for the British meaning of the word mad. Okay, not for the English one, or not for the American one. Sorry. What's the difference between mad in British English and, of course, you can see the American way of using mad?
Angry versus crazy.
That's right. Mad here is angry, and there is crazy. So those are all words that are in some sense related to the word mad. It's part of the neighborhood of being mentally deranged or something of sorts. Okay? So the idea here is that you cannot say that all those words are synonyms. They belong to the same semantic field, but they are not synonyms. What does a synonym mean? I suppose that's the next one? No, I don't know. Well, I have to go back. So what, just getting a little bit ahead. So what is a synonym? That's the most basic one, the most basic lexical relationship for words that you can talk about. What's a synonym?
Two different words that mean the same thing.
Two different words that mean the same thing. And in that case, you cannot say, that for instance, mad means the same as schizophrenic. Schizophrenic has a different meaning. In what sense? What would be schizophrenic?
It's much more specific.
It's much more specific as some kind of mental state that is an alteration of reality. You think that there are two realities and you cannot put them together, or you cannot make sense of what you're listening, you're hearing in your head. For instance, that's a very common situation with schizophrenia. But then they are similar but not the same. When something is supposed to be the same in referential terms, once again the word reference comes back. If you're talking about two different words that have a same referent, then you can say that they are synonymous words. However, when we organize words, and I want to talk about this in the next slide, we can talk about a basic level for the way we understand a word, for the way we understand a family of concepts. And there are some other words that are considered to be of more abstract, higher level, and some other ones that are more specific level, more particular. So that's what I wanted to point out here. So if you go to the middle level, which is right here, you can see an owl, a hen, a lark, and a wren, which are specific kind of birds. However, a higher level is bird, and a lower level for owl, for instance, is a snowy owl, a screech owl, barn owl, and of course the very own rice owl. It's a very important element, part of the hyponyms, the subordinate terms. Why is this important? It looks a little bit like, man, it looks very silly, It's like we have birds. Everybody knows we have birds, and birds can be divided in species of birds, and then you have like more species that are more specific to, let's say, owl or hen. Why is this important? I'm going to give you two reasons why this is important. First, we know as a fact that when children learn language, they do not learn the higher level, and they do not learn the lower level. They learn the basic one first, because it's easier to relate. the level of specificity is too much for them to handle, the level of abstraction is too much for them to handle. Okay? So that's why, for instance, the word dad and the word man, which one is more specific? Dad is more specific. That's why, and that's why, at some point, kids tend to mix things up. And that's why they can use dad, to talk about every male. Because they are using the word dad instead of the word man, which would be a basic level. So it is not that the kid says, oh, that seems to be a basic, seems to be a subordinate term, so I should avoid using it. No, the child doesn't think that way. He or she wants to use the word the way a basic level should be used. So the first relationship we want to talk about is mirroring. Mirroring is part and whole. So you can see here a wheel, or perhaps, is it a wheel? Yeah, you have a wheel here. And then you can talk about all the parts, To talk about hub, to talk about spoke, to talk about ring, to talk about